the continuation of my drummer series, this week I'm talking with Jon Bates. He says he was born at exactly the right time in music, and I tend to agree with him. He talks about all the music scene that he was a part of in the 60s and 70s, and it's a really pivotal moment in music history. I often wonder what it was like to experience that time period firsthand, and John makes us feel like we were there. So I hope you enjoy my talk with Jon Bates. So, here we are on another edition of the Stereo Image, and I have my esteemed guest, Jon Bates, with us. John, I've known for, 30 years, maybe more.
Maybe more.
But, uh, but certainly a huge, huge help to me over the years and a wonderful friend. And he has got a lot to say about the music business and his place in it and all of the good stuff that we want to talk about here. So, welcome, Jon Bates.
Thank you, Mike, for having me. This is different. It's exciting to see that you've got this podcast going, and thank you for inviting me.
Well, it's you're one of my top 10 gets. I know you don't believe it, but you're exactly no. I mean, you've got a million stories and you've got interesting stuff to talk about. And that's the whole idea of this. It's to have people that are. I mean, I want to get musicians too. I'll have plenty of musicians on this podcast, but and you're a great drummer. So I mean, but you know, being a part of Chiaroscuro for so many years and the jazz cruises and all that stuff is all really interesting to me. And but mostly I Jen yells at me all the time for starting the same way, but I'm still gonna do it. Because it's important. Uh like where were you when were you what age were you at when you sort of realized that music was more important to you than your friends? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When you
Well,
started like listening.
okay, so I'm going to try my best to put it into sort of a quick.
Dude, take your time. We got all
But
the time in the world.
so, you know, one of the things that really was a huge pivotal moment for me was seeing the Beatles on Ed Sullivan in
Right.
1964.
Mhm.
Um, that's not a jazz
No, no,
record.
no, and this has
No,
nothing to do with jazz. I
yeah,
wanna
no, I
know,
understand.
like, what you grew up with, you know? I
Yeah,
mean
that was incredibly powerful for me,
sure.
and I was 9 years old,
Mhm.
and it was also a time in 1964, both from the family and environment I grew up in, the town I grew up in, and the world, there was a lot going on. You know, Kennedy had just been shot,
Right,
like,
sure, yeah.
November before, like, a few months before,
Sure.
basically. There was a lot of civil rights stuff, Vietnam, there was, a lot of things that were interconnected in even at that age, but then in those following, between 64 and 68, 69,
Mhm.
70, Martin Luther King was
No,
shot down,
sure, yeah.
all of those kind of things, but they tied into a lot of civil rights stuff. One of the people that was very influential to me and in my community was Pete Seeger, who
Yep,
I lived
yep.
along the Hudson River, and
Mhm.
he was very politically active, and
Right.
so a lot of the folk music scene was very attractive to me. And one
Mhm.
thing I say a lot is that you know, the thing that became such a passion for me, definitely with music, but I always connected to storytellers. Like
Mhm.
I mean, my grandmother was one of the best storytellers, and as a little kid, just she was an educator. She was a brilliant woman. She was somebody that I just remember being. I just loved being that kid that was just listening to older people tell stories,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and that connects a lot to what became so attractive to me about the different music that I ended up. I mean, musicians and artists, and certainly a Pete Seeger or people of that sort. That the thing I guess I realize is that I deeply connected to melodies, to lyrics, because
Mhm.
I really was into the content of lyrics.
Right.
You know, vocal harmonies and harmonies in general, rhythm. Um,
Mhm.
and just the energy and joy of storytelling. And, you know, the thing that, when people not I shouldn't phrase it that way. It has nothing to do with when people say or think, but for me, when I try to think about how it all connected and how weird it was that I was so attracted to, say, a Rahsaan Roland Kirk and a Pete Seeger and a Bob Dylan at
Mm.
such opposite ends of the spectrum, you know, it was because the energy, the enthusiasm, and the storytelling, even though, someone like Rahsaan Roland Kirk didn't
Right.
tell it in poetic way, well, not in,
Yeah.
not
Not in
verbal
verbal.
ways, but I mean, I was so blessed as a kid at 13 years old, 14 years old. I could go to the Village Vanguard and Max Gordon would let us stand by the bar and
Uh-huh.
I could hear the most incredible music that I had no idea, but I would hear Rahsaan Roland Kirk. I would
Right.
hear McCoy Tyner. I,
Right.
I would hear the Thad Jones, Mel Lewis big band.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It was like, and I could sit there and behave myself and drink a Coke and stand there and be out of the
Right.
way, and nobody was like,
What are you
I,
doing here?
no
Yeah.
one cared.
Yeah, yeah,
And I
yeah.
could also go down to Second Avenue and go to the Fillmore East and
Mhm.
hear the most. It it
Yeah.
it, it wasn't anything. There was no model for this at that time. This was
Right.
happening in real time, and nobody really knew what was happening. It came out of so many scenes, and the whole hippie culture. I was very much part of the hippie drug
Mhm.
culture, all of that. As a kid, being in the West Village in New York, there was just so much different cultural things happening that it all tied in one way or another to music. And a
Mhm.
lot of the people that you wouldn't necessarily, people put things in a lot of different buckets. But, one of the people I was aware of from a young age, but then got to know well was John Hammond. And he was
Mhm.
an example of a producer who, was he was signing people, first of all, besides his involvement with people like Billie Holiday and Count
Yeah.
Basie, and he was signing Bob Dylan, and he was
Right.
in this, which I came to understand better later, but he was in this unique situation with Columbia Records where, if they said, no way, that's not something that's going to work,
Right.
he was from the Vanderbilt
Yeah.
family, and he could say, "Okay, well, then I'll pay for it and,
Right.
and make it
Right.
happen." But my point is that it all intertwined from different
Right.
places, and it wasn't, you didn't really think of it as, is it jazz or is it rock or
Right, right. It was just music.
it was just
And
music, and
and
it was the energy that you felt around it.
yeah.
I mean, of course, I would love, so 13, 14, listening to McCoy Tyner was, I just remember how hard he hit the piano
Right.
and
Yeah,
how
yeah.
passionately, but I don't even now, the way that you would be able to understand, I would hear the voicings, or I would hear
Yeah, yeah.
or when you talk about the difference between a Ron Carter and a Ray Brown, and one's
Mhm.
playing like, I can
Yeah.
hear that one's on the beat and in the pocket, and the
Right.
other one's kind of, but in terms of the theory around that, I wish I had the exposure to have learned that. I just never
Mhm.
did, and it wasn't part of my world in that way. But
Right.
it wasn't that all of that. I mean, feeling the passion from those people was just, I just knew that's what I wanted to be around every
Uh-huh.
moment of every day, the rest of
Wow.
my life, you know?
Wow.
And
And so you would take the train into New York at 13 to 14 and just do this stuff.
yeah, and with
Um,
friends, I mean, I had
yeah,
a couple of friends
yeah.
that, were the same thing.
Yeah, yeah, and it's well, I mean, yeah, I mean, going back to living in striking distance of the village and of Manhattan and all the stuff that is that's really lucky and a privilege that you were but also that time period of, as you said, the 60s when everything was happening. I mean,
Yeah,
everything was
it was
happening in art, everything was happening in music, everything and New York was the center of it all.
it
And, let me ask you this, so you go through high school, and then what'd you do next? I mean,
okay,
did
so
you go to school?
going through high school, I mean, there was a lot of stuff that was so powerful for me. I mean, like I say, the Fillmore East, for instance, and
Mhm.
and and that kind of stuff, being able to, um, hear live bands like Sly and the Family Stone, Jimi
Sure.
Hendrix,
Yeah.
Janis Joplin. I heard James Brown at the Apollo.
Wow.
I heard Cream, at the
Yep.
Garden, Santana, whoever. I mean,
Yeah.
many people, and there were, high school and just beyond. There were, of course, the festivals, Woodstock,
Right.
Watkins Glen. We went to Newport Jazz and folk festivals. I mean, my brother,
Mhm.
my group of friends. Back then you just hitchhiked and you camped out, and
Wow.
it was just a different thing. And
Right. Well, did you go to Woodstock?
everybody has a Woodstock story. I was in my first little band. I was 13, and we had a band called Tidewater Mansion, and we actually had one of our first gigs that was so exciting to us in about an hour north of where we lived, in a place called Accord, New York, which was about 20 miles, 25 miles from Bethel, which is where
Right.
the
Yeah.
Woodstock Festival wasn't actually in
Right.
Woodstock.
We yeah.
And so we were 13 and 14-year-old kids. I had a foster brother who we dropped off at the Tappan Zee Bridge, and he hitchhiked to Woodstock, and we were going to meet him there. And well, my brother I was
Right.
14,
Sure.
so I didn't drive yet, but well, I did, but didn't legally drive it. But anyway, my point is that we had, we were naive. No one knew Woodstock was going to be Woodstock to the way it was. We had this gig. We thought we were, it was just so great. It was in a
Sure.
parking lot of a church in Accord, New York, where anyway, and it was along Route 208, I think it was, that went over toward Bethel, New York, which is where the
Mhm.
festival was.
Right.
So at that time, we were passionate Jimi Hendrix fans. So our thing, he was supposed to go on Sunday night or
Mhm.
Sunday. I don't remember now. It's been a lot
Yeah.
of years. But anyway, so our whole thing was we're going to go play our gig. Then we're going to hitchhike to Woodstock, which was like 20 miles away. And
Mhm.
we're going to get there on Sunday. Our gig was on Saturday.
Right.
And, that's all we knew about what was going to happen at Woodstock. It
Right.
was raining that weekend. We played our gig. By the time we were starting to play in this parking lot, it was just blocked traffic
Uh-huh.
far back further than the 20 miles we were from Bethel. And the New York State Thruway was closed. And it was just one of these things where, anyway, I did not get to Woodstock. Jimi
Okay.
Hendrix didn't end up playing until Monday
Monday
morning.
morning. Right. Right.
And if we had known that, we probably would have just walked the 20 miles.
Sure.
Who knows?
Yeah.
It was just a crazy thing. But I was at Watkins Glen, which was a
Uh-huh.
whole other crazy, and
Yeah.
that was like the Grateful Dead, the band, the Allman Brothers.
Mhm.
I was at a lot of the Newport folk and jazz festivals.
Wow.
Um, and then back at that time too, there was like places around New York that people don't know about. Like there was not people don't know about, but that aren't
That aren't
thought of
famous. Yeah.
when you think of that time and that era. But like Orchard Beach in the Bronx was a notable location where Latin percussionists would just congregate and jam, and
Mhm.
you'd have all these it was kind of the cultural hub of the beginning of that salsa music in New York.
Wow. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so as a kid that was into like just the passion and the rhythms and all of that
Mhm.
stuff and the culture, like I mean, that was probably as exhilarating for me as anything I could think of. And so to try to tie it in together in certain ways. So I didn't come from a musical family.
Mhm.
I mean, my family enjoyed music. No one was particularly musical. I did have a great uncle, my father's uncle, he actually died 10 years before I was born in the 19 from like 1900 to 1920. He was a policeman in central Harlem where he grew up and lived,
Mhm.
um, which at that time was a multi-ethnic sort of neighborhood, but it was a German neighborhood with, you know,
Mhm.
in the area where he was. Anyway, and he was a cop and he played piano for silent films at night.
Oh, wow. Uh-huh.
So everybody of my grandparents and my father, they would remember Uncle George as like how fun it was because he would play that,
Sure.
silent piano style
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
uh anyway, that I keep digressing. But so that was I didn't know him, but the thing that was kind of my folks grew up listening, and there was a place called Glen Island Casino. I
Oh,
don't know if
yeah, yeah,
well,
sure.
they grew up right there in New Rochelle,
Okay.
New York,
Mhm.
and so they had, their thing was Glenn Miller and Tommy Dorsey,
Yep,
and they saw when Benny Goodman was at the Paramount and Gene Krupa had just gotten out of jail
right.
for pot.
Yep,
They were at the performance where the Paramount had a riser that came up
yeah,
to the
yep.
stage, and nobody was sure if Gene Krupa was going to be there, and he came, so
Eh,
they were fans.
yeah, yeah,
They had pretty crazy lives, and it wasn't my family was not one of these harmonious like families in many
oh,
ways, but the thing I do have fond memories of were my parents enjoyed dancing, and I
mhm,
remember them on certain occasions, the time that seemed to me like they were happiest was, if there was a situation where I saw them dancing to like a big band they had
yeah.
that Lindy style of dancing,
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
not like the Lindy Hoppers, but
No, no, I
the where it was really fun, and so
right.
that was a connection. And then the thing that my father and I didn't have a great relationship, but
Mhm,
thing that he was a well, one of the things he would watch the Tonight Show religiously and
mhm.
watch the Tonight Show band. And so as I got into drumming, and he would be, do you know who Ed Shaughnessy is? He goes, you watch this guy. And then of course when
Mhm.
Buddy Rich was on, or
Sure.
and when Louis Bellson was on, he would be like, you want to see a drummer? You think you're
Yeah,
going to
yeah.
be a drummer? And well, the happiest memory in my life after a lot of years of really difficult things with my
Mhm.
dad, we had kind of, we were communicating, and P.S. Many years later, I was Louis Bellson's tech for 20 years, and I
Right.
I would contract musicians for his big band in New York and work with him and Pearl Bailey on
Mhm.
shows. And the funniest thing was my dad, at that time, I kept all of Louis's Northeast
Right.
drum stuff.
Drums at your house, yeah.
And well, I would keep them at my parents' garage because that's
Oh.
where there was room. And my father was so proud, as much later on, that he had Louis Bellson's drums in his garage. That he could not, get over that. Like I must have made it because
Right.
I like had Louis Bellson's drums being delivered to his house. And then the fun thing was, and Louis was just one of the most amazing people, to the
Mhm.
point that I mean, I would cart his stuff around in a Mazda pickup truck, and Louis was staying at the Carlisle with Pearl, and I would pick him up. And no, I mean, he could have had a car service.
Right,
He
sure,
would
yeah.
he would he would get in my Mazda pickup truck, and when we would get to the club, he'd be climbing in the back of my pickup. I'd be like, "Louis, no, no, I got it." Like he was just
Yeah.
there was nothing about him that was like, I mean, he just was one of these people that I don't care who you were, he'd end up knowing more about you than you would have,
Right, right.
in a conversation, just because he was that kind of guy. But one of the fun things for me was that, toward the end of my dad's life, actually, and I was close to Louis. He was playing at a double bill with Phil Wood's quartet or quintet at the
Mhm.
Blue Note, and he said, "Bring your dad."
Yeah.
And it didn't really occur to me, but I asked my dad, and he was like a little kid. He was just like,
Ah,
"Oh my God." And of course, we sat there, and my dad didn't get Phil Woods at all. Phil Woods was the opening act, and
sure.
he was just kind of like, yeah, that's interesting. But Louis made a fuss over him, and he was like, and I think it was truly one of. I mean, my dad had a crazy life, and just when I was a junior in high school, his business went bankrupt. And
Oh, geez.
honestly, when I look back on it now, I feel like all the stuff that I interpreted the way I did then, and I was I had a lot of issues and demons as well,
Mhm.
but I I realize now that he was just deeply depressed.
Oh,
I
sure, yeah.
that was really, a lot of the issue that I interpreted. But it also isn't that's not an excuse for him treat us in
I know,
the
yeah,
family the way he did. Anyway,
yeah.
but my point is, is that there were so many interesting things that way. But you asked where I went after high school.
Mhm.
So at that time, 1972, there were no programs available. I had decided I wanted to learn recording engineering and I wanted to be
Okay.
around recording studios.
Right.
And there were no programs to go learn that. And getting an apprenticeship in a studio was practically impossible.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, anyway, but what I did is I started there was sort of a program at Syracuse University, which I didn't end up going to, but a lot of colleges had radio television
Oh, right.
majors,
Yeah.
and you could learn a lot of, production audio kind of stuff. It was, back then you got your third class operator's radio license. I mean, it
Mhm.
was it was more about how to work in a radio station, not necessarily as a DJ, but
Yeah.
operating
Running
the
the board.
equipment. And then also there was an element of learning how to do stuff that I hadn't particularly cared about, but became very interesting in terms of, how to write storyboards for shows, and how to
Mhm.
uh, how to do some of the audio and the camera angles and stuff for that. So
Mhm.
anyway, I ended up going to Ithaca College.
Okay.
um, I was a very poor student, but I somehow, back then, SATs were really important. And
Mhm.
I got a 750 on my math SAT. And even though my grades were not great, that was considered a big deal. And
Right.
I,
Sure.
and I was able to get in based on that. They had a great music department, but I wasn't going for music, and I wasn't. But their TV radio department was one of the best, and there were some
Mhm.
really good professors there. Unfortunately, I also had a pretty bad drug problem at the time,
Oh, geez.
and
Yeah.
yeah, I was addicted to heroin for a number of years in my
Oh,
teenage.
God.
Yeah,
Oh.
so that was a whole other issue. But it ended up that now one of the great memories I have of being at Ithaca College, besides some of the professors who stood by me to the end of
Mhm.
my having to leave the second semester of my sophomore year, um, and some really, I mean, I got to do some. I was very involved in civil rights stuff. The Attica uprising had happened. I was
Mhm.
I was doing radio shows with a lot of the Attica inmates who were involved in that, and
Mhm.
some of them got picked up on a number of radio stations. That, I mean, in spite of my demons, I still had certain passions, and did certain things that were relevant in some way or another, that all connected. But one of the really exciting things for me was that Buddy Rich's big band played at Ithaca College in 1973.
Mhm.
And so I went by in the afternoon when I knew they'd be rehearsing, and I watched them rehearse. It was the first time I realized that Buddy used a rehearsal drummer, that he couldn't read, and that he had Steve Marcus. I don't know who the rehearsal drummer was, but the drummer, read down the charts. Buddy listened, and he had what I've heard people like Paul Schaefer have, but this audiological memory, where
Right.
he would hear it once, and I mean, he'd get all the hits, and he just played it
Yeah.
like he read it, as if he had read it. But
Yeah.
one of the exciting things about that was the guitar player was this young guy. I mean, older than me, but probably in his, maybe mid to late 20s, named Jack Wilkins.
Mhm.
And I ended up just becoming a huge Jack Wilkins fan, just watching him. And later on, of course, knew him well through Chiaroscuro, and
Sure. Sure.
was able to produce an album, uh,
Right.
with him and the Breckers, and Eddie Gomez and Jack DeJohnette, and people that, again, I mean, people I never dreamed of being able to be in the same studio with. And,
Right.
and
Mhm.
but anyway, that was a big influence. What happened is I ended up having to get my act together and transfer, and I ended up also, at that time, things had changed slightly, and I wanted to go. I started to hear about Berklee College of Music in 1974. That it was a very different place than it is now,
Yeah.
but you could take classes. I could actually study with Alan Dawson. I
Mhm.
could, take advantage of certain things, and I could go. And I got accepted to BU in their communications school of communications, and that's where I started to also have the opportunity. There was a studio on Newbury Street back then called Intermedia Sound,
Uh-huh.
um,
Mhm.
and I was able, through one of my professors, to get like an internship there. So it was kind of the beginning of kind of connecting the recording studio thing to my passion
Right.
for music and the rest of it.
Well,
Um, Go
now
ahead.
to interject, So at this time, the draft is still going on, right? I mean, are you
I
in
was the
college?
last year of the draft.
Oh, okay.
My number was high,
Oh, okay.
but they didn't actually call anybody. I turned 18 in 72,
Oh, okay.
and my brother turned 18 in 70. We both had to get our draft cards,
Mhm.
but the end of his year was the last that they were actually drafting.
Oh, okay.
So I didn't
And
have an issue with
yeah,
that.
so you weren't just in school to avoid being called up.
No, no, no.
Oh,
I
good.
mean,
Yeah.
a lot of people were, of course,
Right.
and if I could have been, I would have been.
Right, right, right. I
But
got you.
yeah, but that was not. I was right on the
Mhm.
back end of that.
Okay.
Go
So,
ahead.
you sort of started learning the inside of the business from the Newbury Street studio.
And I would go to places. I don't know when you were in Boston. I guess like Paul's Mall and the Jazz Workshop and some of those places were still there. But
N I think that maybe the Jazz Workshop closed right as I got there, like in the late '70s or early '80s. But I by the time I got there, it wasn't there anymore. And Storyville was like a legend at that time.
so you
But
were like 5 years after me, probably. I guess.
I got there in '81. So
Okay, and I left. I actually left Boston because I ended up graduating January of '77.
oh, okay.
So
Mhm.
and then, but while I was in Boston, I would also go up to Sandy's Jazz
Oh,
Revival
yes,
in
Andy's, yeah.
Peabody, and I would hear, Joe Williams with Alan Dawson, and I heard Terry Lynn Carrington sit in at 12 years old,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
like it was that kind of stuff that just it wasn't.
It
I just was lucky, I
yeah,
just and you would hear and at Paul's Mall, I would hear, the Brecker brothers, I would hear Tony Williams' Lifetime, I would hear
right.
Roy Ayers, I would hear,
Yeah.
just all these, just
Oh,
lots and
I
lots.
know. I mean, with the scene when I was in even when I was there in the '80s, Miles was playing. I mean, they recorded some of Miles's comeback in like '81 over in Cambridge at a club over there, and there was so many pla there was the Willow, and there was all these great clubs. I mean, I go see George Garzone in the Fringe on Wednesday nights at the
Uh,
Willow. They would bring in like crazy people. Like I'm know I'm going to mispronounce the name of the group, but uh, the Wilhelm Bruckauer Collective,
oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? Which
I
was
know
like
who.
this insane, like a lot like Sun Ra's band. I mean, in terms of they're playing really out stuff, and then come together for this tight Fletcher Henderson type sax solo, and then get in their back, and they're marching through they're going out playing this insane version of When the Saints Go Marching In, going out the door of into Somerville,
Yep,
and it's freezing cold, and they're coming back. I mean, and I used to see, I mean, I saw everything that I could when I was at Berkeley. That was most of my education came after Berkeley,
yeah,
because I was playing with the guys. I was playing gigs every week with Herb Pomeroy and Dick Johnson, and Gray Sargent. And when I had that gig, and it's not about me, but when I had that gig at the Colonnade, which
yeah,
was every 2 weeks, it was Scott Hamilton for 2 weeks, Clark Terry for 2 weeks. It was every 2 weeks, it was some other big star with me and Marshall Wood on bass, or me and Pete Contreras on bass. And that's where I really learned how to play,
yep.
to play behind all these different guys and what they wanted. We've sort of skipped over, when did you really start to get into drums? I mean,
Well, no, I mean from 12, 13 years old,
uh-huh.
I was
I mean,
passionate.
you were already gigging when you were 13.
Yeah, no,
So
I was passionate, and I was really good at like I would get all the high school dances, and I grew up in a
uh-huh.
town where the recreation department, the guy that was head of the recreation department, was very supportive. I grew up in a town where he would put on events where all the kids that played could play, and there was also an interesting older, like, I don't know if you know who Sonny Chirac was, but he
Yeah,
was a avant-garde jazz guitarist who grew up, who was from my town, and I knew a lot of his family and his nephews and nieces and so forth. But there were a lot of people like Sonny who were as bizarre and avant-garde out there as his playing was. He connected people connected to other, like he's on Miles's tribute to Jack Johnson,
right. Yeah.
album, and at that time he was playing with Herbie Mann, which I still don't know how that connection. there was opportunities. We had a place called the Cellar in the rec department where you get like would be the equivalent of kids jam sessions. And
Mhm.
unlike a lot of people I hear, they talk about, I mean, sure, there was that thing like, oh, I could play better than him, or I could play better than him, or he, whatever. But it was a much more, there was a very mentoring thing in where I grew up. And I always played.
Right.
I just, I mean, let's say when I was at the guys that were like Tommy Campbell
Oh,
with
yeah.
Tiger Akoshi with, I played the stuff I played and I managed to always play, but I realized I didn't have that kind of technique or that kind of, and I didn't have illusions about, I wasn't the guy that had the discipline or, I mean, I was so OCD and so whatever
Mhm.
the alphabet letters are. It wasn't that I had a good work ethic, but
Mhm.
not like I wasn't the guy that was going to sit in a practice room for 8 hours or even
Right.
2 hours.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
And so anyway, I played drums always, but
Mhm.
um, and going back for 1 second when I was thinking about Miles, I was thinking like, in 1969, just for example, like the kind of bills at the Fillmore East, I saw Miles on the same bill the same night as Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention, Buddy Miles Express, and Chicago.
Jeez.
Like
Yeah,
those,
yeah, yeah.
and those horn bands were really influential, like Blood, Sweat, and Tears,
Oh, yeah.
Chicago. I became a huge Tower of Power fan, and
Mhm.
like anyway. So what happened in Boston was I was playing. I'm trying to think if any of them would have been musicians you knew. Anyway,
Well,
a
I
lot of
certainly
them,
knew Tommy Campbell and Tiger. They
yeah,
were
yeah.
there when I was
Well,
there.
and Makoto was there when you were there
I'm gonna see him. We're gonna get together when I play,
in New York.
in New York. He's doing a thing on the 15th for Oscar's 100th birthday with Makoto and, John Clayton and Jeff Hamilton at Birdland. And anyone, I mean, that can get there to see that will be
Yeah,
blown
sure.
away. I mean, because nobody authentically could play the Oscar stuff better than Makoto. And, and so anyways, he reached out to me on Facebook and we talked a bit, and he's gonna be in town after that, and I get in town 19th for Radio City. So we're gonna get together for lunch or something, and it'll be the first time I've seen him I mean, we hung out a lot at Berkeley,
Yeah,
and, it'll be the first time I've seen him in 42 years.
it's
So,
so crazy how that
um
works.
yeah, I know.
Believe me, I just turned 70, Mike, and I'm like,
Oh,
what
man.
the frick?
Yeah.
But so I want to try to get to Chiaroscuro. So
Yeah, sure.
what happened was I graduated from BU in January of 77, and
Mhm.
I really didn't know what I was going to do. I back then there was no internet, there was no if you called somebody on the phone, you called a landline that was in the house where a family lived,
Yeah. Oh, I
and
know.
it was before they even had answering machines,
Right.
and that's how it was. And so I hand wrote and typed resumes and letters that I probably sent to, no exaggeration, 100 recording studios,
Uh-huh.
saying I would work for free, saying I would, you know, do anything. I just wanted to have an opportunity to be around and in a recording studio where I could learn. And
Right.
and through college, I still hadn't, except for intermediate sound, I still hadn't really had the opportunity to be around recording sessions from beginning to end, to the final mix, to everything that is
Right.
involved, and also just to learn how to do that stuff. And you really just have to, at least I believe, you have to learn that kind of stuff by being around it and
Yeah.
watching and doing it. And so I knocked on so many doors. I freaking went places, and just waited for them to open to try, and
Mhm.
anyway, so 1977, I get a call. I no, I saw an ad in a, I don't think it might have been the Village Voice, but I saw an ad for a drummer for a band that was based in New Paltz, New York, which now is up in the Catskill Mountains,
Mhm.
2 hours, an hour and a half at least out of New York City,
Sure.
to play it was a funk band,
Mhm.
and they were having an audition. And so I went and I ended up getting the gig.
Mhm.
And I ended up living for a while. I lived in this band had a rehearsal space, and I just slept there. And
Right.
then I had a friend that went to New Paltz, a girl that I knew growing up, and I ended up moving into her apartment. And after about 3 months, there was a guy in Millbrook, New York, which was in the Catskills, not too far from there, named Lloyd Sims, and he had had a couple of hits on Atlantic Records in the '50s. And one was called Mr. Personality. He worked with Pat Lundy, and I don't know. Anyway, and he heard the band that I had auditioned for that I was in then, and he was at that time he had these tours of Canada and Puerto Rico and the Midwest, and he asked us if we wanted to be his band. He had
Right.
lost whatever it was. Well, Lloyd Sims was the epitome of the stereotypical, super fly image that people who didn't really, he had a big red Cadillac. He wore red suits and
Mhm.
hats. It was like this whole thing, and so anyway, to try to shorten the story, we ended up first doing a tour of Tracadie, New Brunswick, Halifax, all of Newfoundland. We did like 9 different places over a couple of months. And all along the way, I was writing letters. And I had a neighbor in my community named Bill Gallagher. Bill Gallagher had been extremely kind and mentoring to me when I
Mhm.
was growing up. He was a vice president at Columbia Records. He had no reason to, I knew his kids,
Right.
but he had no reason to give me the time of day, but he saw my passion. And back then, I mean, my whole experience of buying record albums, the local record store, it was before they had record stores. You bought records in the back of five and dime stores.
Right.
And, this guy, Herbie Smith, who was the guy who was at the record store, in the record department, he was hugely influential in turning me on to like all kinds of new stuff that had come out. And, listen to this, listen to whatever.
Yeah.
And so anyway, but Bill Gallagher at that time he was at Columbia at the time when bands Bob Dylan, the Byrds,
Mhm.
um, like these band Jefferson Airplane,
Yeah.
um, and Miles was at Columbia.
Right.
But there were different things that he would get, like DJ copies of things, or he was always kind of sharing stuff with me and talking to me about the industry. If you want to really read an amazing book. It's called The Hitmen, and it's about Columbia Records at that time.
Mhm.
And Bill Gallagher was the vice president of marketing, and Clive Davis was a vice president. And they had one of them was going to beat the other one
Right.
and Clive Davis won out. But it's a
Yeah.
really well written, interesting book about the record industry at that time. Anyway, I was in Corner Brook, Newfoundland, and my mother called me at the hotel that we were at,
Mhm.
and I thought that was kind of weird, and had left a message. So I called home. I thought someone had died or
Yeah,
something.
sure, sure.
She goes, there was a phone call today. I got a call from Bill Gallagher, and he said that you had written him a letter about, trying to get a recording studio opportunity. And he said, when you get back in town, he wants you to come see him. And so I like immediately
Yeah.
called him,
Right.
and the conversation was that he had left Columbia. He was now the president of a company called Audio Fidelity.
Mhm.
Um, Audio Fidelity had an opportunity, which what it turned out to be in the late 1970s. There were these tax shelters,
Oh, I
and
know. Yeah.
so what would happen is people who had money would probably put, I don't know what, they'd put 10 or $20,000 up to make a record.
Mhm.
But because it was so ambiguous, or whatever the word is, about how I didn't know
Right.
anything and still don't about the whole tax thing. But the way tax shelters worked is that people would put up 10 or $20,000, and then they would be able to write off as if they had put up 200,000.
Uh-huh.
And so they were big tax scams.
Mhm.
I don't know what else you would call it. But
Sure.
he said, we have this opportunity to produce a lot of records this year. I want you to come when you come back in town. I want you to go down to Christopher Street in the West Village.
Mhm.
And what we've done is we've formed a partnership to distribute a label that's been started by a guy named Hank O'Neill, who has a recording studio, and
Mhm.
he records jazz musicians. He records jazz artists. And I told him that you'd be a great guy to be a gopher and to
Sure.
come down. So I just wet my pants. And now, P.S. I had spent a lot of time in the West Village. Christopher Street was a unique place at that time. It was
Mhm,
ground zero for the gay pride movement. It was
mhm.
post the Stonewall riots when the cops
Right.
came in to raid the Stonewall bar in Sheridan Square,
Mhm.
and they ended up in a riot.
Sure.
And it was pre-AIDS.
Right.
So Christopher Street was from Sheridan, from 7th Avenue down to the Hudson River, was this unbelievable, not it was ground zero for the S&M,
Mhm.
transvestite hooker.
Uh-huh.
I mean, there was
All
there
the
was
good stuff.
there was a guy dressed in a full bride's gown on roller skates his who would walk his partner on a leash. Who would
Uh-huh.
there was the Silver Dollar restaurant next door to the building that Downtown Sound was in. That was it was a little, not restaurant. It was a little diner. It was a little
Mhm.
greasy spoon called the Silver Dollar. This guy Joey from Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, who was a real stereotypical, just Italian,
Mhm.
like not tough guy, but he
Yeah,
was
yeah.
that stereotypical Italian kid for Bensonhurst, owned it, and the clientele was all these transvestite models who would be sitting in there with copies of Vogue and Cosmopolitan,
Yeah,
and they
yeah.
would be laughing because they would be on the cover and they would be in the
Right.
in these magazines where the rest of the world thought they were beautiful women,
Mhm.
and the design, what they were was they were the partners of these designers, and
Right, sure, sure. Yeah, yeah.
but it was the funniest, crazy. But the point is, and you saw much more decadent stuff than that too. And if you
Oh,
the
I
S&M
imagine.
clubs were bikers, like, greased up, that were doing anyway. My point is, in the middle of this, and this wasn't like, oh, you might see it. I mean,
Right. No, no, no.
you'd see
This was
guys
you had to step over it. Yeah.
on the church steps, like, as you're walking down from the train. And
Sure.
meanwhile, this little jazz studio owned by Hank O'Neill
Mhm.
is right in the center of this. And so, of course, like, first of all, my first day that I went down, I dress up in a suit because
Right,
I'm
sure.
thinking, like, of course, that's what you should do. Well, I get there, and I mean, Hank has, I don't know if he had shoes on or not. He had, jeans and a t-shirt, and
Uh-huh.
and Hank was just a character that, and
Yeah,
we
yeah.
could go on ten more podcasts about Hank. But but I won't even say what he said, but he came out, but
You can. It
the
doesn't
one
matter.
thing, well, the first thing he said, and Bill Gallagher had told him I'd be coming down,
Yeah, yeah.
and the very first thing he said, he looks at me and he goes, "It's Needle Dick the Bug Fucker." Now, I didn't know whether to hit him or I mean, I was
Yeah,
a
yeah.
kid that was like, I didn't know whether to laugh. I was like,
Yeah,
"Eh," it was
yeah.
totally disarming. But
Right.
coming to know Hank, it was just, he just said it, and it was nothing more or
Right.
less than,
Sure.
but to any normal people, it would just be
Right.
bizarre. And then he goes, "You're overdressed." And of course, I felt embarrassed, and I said, "Oh, I'm meeting some people for, I have to go." I made up a whole thing.
Sure, sure, sure.
And anyway, and then he basically, I started to try to launch into this thing about how, you know, where I went to college or something. And he goes, "Just come down tomorrow morning, and, like, great, glad to have you." And it was like, that was the extent of it. And I ended up, within 3 weeks, I commuted by the train for about 3 weeks. By the third week, I moved in and slept on the couch, and I lived at the studio.
Wow.
And we did 100 record albums in less than 2 years from the
Jesus.
day I got there. So that means one a week.
Right.
And it was the luminaries of
Oh, yeah.
the jazz world. Now, the first thing now, Hank started Chiaroscuro out of a passion and a very limited budget. And because of that, his first recordings were a lot of stride piano players,
Mhm.
Earl Hines,
Yeah.
UB Blake,
Yeah.
Willie the Lion Smith. And so I got a lot of exposure to that stuff, and just was like, oh my God, I love this stuff.
Mhm.
I had already had I was drawn to like a lot of the organ trio stuff, the Jimmy Smith, Jack
Mhm.
McDuff, Jimmy McGriff, Lou Donaldson, um, the stuff with Dr. Lonnie.
Oh,
Um,
sure.
anyway, the first like in the first few months, the number of mainstream bebop, there was a lot of the whole jazz fusion thing was happening, and a lot of the
Mhm.
players that were instrumental in that stuff. I got to be one of my first sessions was Jack Wilkins with Michael and Randy Brecker. John Burr was the bass player. Al Foster was the drummer.
Ah, yeah.
I mean, and then a lot of avant-garde stuff like I don't know if you would know Hammy It Blew It,
Oh,
David
sure.
Bowie,
Yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah, I
you
know
know,
every
and the funny thing about just real quickly going back to some of the avant-garde stuff, there was a period of time I was really into like Archie Shepp and
Yep.
uh and Roswell Rudd and
Mhm.
that kind of stuff. And it was more coming from the influences of people I grew up around, older, the Sonny Sharrock's. There was a guy,
Mhm.
still a good friend, Ted Daniel, who had a
Mhm.
band in the city called Energy that was a 10-piece like avant-garde big band. But the funny thing was I ended up in my drumming world making a fairly decent living, better than I did at most of the
Mhm.
music industry stuff I was doing, playing weddings.
Right.
And I had at one point, my band was doing 130 jobs, 140 jobs a year
Mhm.
at embarrassingly good money,
No, I know.
knowing the
That's
guys that I like idolized were making, $100 a
right.
night. And but I had a dear friend who was a great trumpet player who was actually in that Lloyd Sims band that went to Canada and Puerto Rico, and his
Mhm.
name was Tim Bott, and he lived up in Woodstock, New York, and he became over the years very good friends with Roswell Rudd,
Mhm.
and so we're doing a club day, a wedding at one point, and Tim was a great, you know, jazz musician. Another guy in that band was Sam Furness, who was
Oh,
a
yeah.
wonderful sax player who died way too young back in
Yeah.
2005, but he was also in that band, and they like I had amazing players, but they were making a living playing, playing these gigs. So one day I needed a horn section, and I didn't have a trombone player who was available, and he goes, how about if I ask Roswell? I was like, Roswell Rudd, and he's like, yeah, Roswell will do it. And so meanwhile, I'm thinking Roswell Rudd is going to come and like on the solos, he's not going to know any of the any of
Right.
the
I need a charts, I need a
parts,
tune.
and he's gonna blow these crazy solos, but I would just be thrilled to have him there. And so do you know, he shows up on the gig, the most humble, sweet, brilliant guy, and he freaking I forget now if it was a thing where there were certain I mean, there's certain tunes you had to know for that particular gig.
Right.
Anyway, he showed up, he knew all the heads, he knew all the signature lines, he played the most melodic, beautiful solos, and then about 10 years later, I mean, we worked together a bunch, and then like 10
Mhm.
years, and he still continued to do,
Oh,
he
sure.
was, I would never tell people that Roswell wrote, but then the first club dates I did in New York, for like these agencies, the percussionist was like Candido,
Right, right, right.
making $125 back then because
Oh,
that was union scale in 1980 or whatever.
right.
But there were these guys that Mel Lewis was on a club date one time that I came in Peekskill, New York, and I'm just like, this is sick. This is embarrassing. But
Yeah,
um,
but it's you
my
gotta make a
point was,
living.
and then later on, I got to play with a number with Buddy Guy. I got to play
Mhm.
with Chuck Berry. I got and I had a that Hank got me a Bo Diddley gig in New York in New York City,
Mhm.
and I put Roswell on that, and
Uh-huh.
and he was phenomenal. I mean, it was.
Uh-huh.
I'm just saying. I don't know. I'm off on a tangent, but my point is, it's just crazy how people. Music is in a weird way. Music is music, and
Right.
people, you know, it's just crazy. But anyway,
I was in my first wedding band when I was 13, with my former teacher, from grammar school. They had this band, and they were booked 2 weddings a weekend, you know,
yep.
all the time. And it was I was making more money than my dad, you know?
No, it's true. It's
But
crazy.
yeah, but the thing is, I learned it, the East Coast calls it GB.
Yeah,
Um,
general
yeah, general
business.
business, yeah, and the
That
West Coast calls it casuals.
well,
But,
in Boston, they call it GB, but, like, in New York, they still call it club dates.
club dates, yeah, yeah, yeah. But anyways, but I mean, yeah, I mean, I did club dates in Boston with all the heavy guys that that taught at Berkeley and taught at New England Conservatory, and they'd all either be doing gigs at hotels because back then
Yep,
every hotel had
yep,
a lounge,
absolutely.
um, or they would be, or we'd be out in Chestnut Hill playing the Rosencrantz's wedding, and making $500 a piece,
Yep.
so you were at Chiaroscuro later than I thought. You're younger than I thought you were. No, I didn't know. So if you didn't come until the Audio Fidelity years or Audiophile or whatever,
Audio Fidelity, yep,
Audio
yep.
Fidelity, because Hank started the label like in '73 or something like that, right?
Yeah, he started it then, and that's when he did a lot of the early
Right. He did the Dave stuff, a couple of Dave.
yeah, but I saw Dave there, for
Oh yeah.
a couple of sessions, and, Joe Venuti and Zoot
Right.
Sims,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
and they would be there for other things. I'm trying to think if I was when was the record some of the Chiaroscuro covers are the worst ever, that
Ah,
but,
hey, 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 you're
I
talking to
won't
the
go
man
into
with
that,
5
but
Green Mill, mister.
the
Greatest jazz cover in history.
one, yeah, that you probably should edit that out, but no, but it's just unbelievable. But anyway, what's the one with Dave McKenna with the Red Sox hat?
Uh, oh, yeah, yeah, what you mean? I know the
Yes,
album.
I think that was recorded after I was there. I could be wrong.
Oh, okay.
And then
But
and Ken and Hank did a lot of, he did the Eddie Condon stuff and
right, right.
some of
Yeah,
the early Buck Clayton jam sessions that he did.
yeah.
Um, but basically, when I got there, there was the main engineer was a guy named Fred Miller,
Mhm,
who I just love Fred to this day. He was so mentoring, and
mhm.
he was one of these engineers. I mean, he was actually a English horn player, but he was one of these engineers that really could sit there and look at a big band chart and follow everything, and I always respected that,
Right,
and never had that skill to do
right,
some of that stuff. But he was also just very quick and taught me just so much about how to interact and how to. I mean, I was always pretty good at in spite, although it doesn't seem like it in this context. I mean, I could keep my mouth shut and be a fly on the wall, and you know, um,
yeah.
and I was good in that way. But Fred was just an incredible teacher. And then
Mhm.
there was a dear friend who I ended up playing a lot of music with as well later, named Phil Clendenin, who was a just a brilliant piano player. He had a band called Tarika Blue that during those times they opened for Herbie Hancock. They opened for
Okay. Mhm.
a lot of it was that funk jazz headhunters period. But Phil was a brilliant musician, and he and Hank had gotten close because Hank had a thing with the new school that we had a recording engineering class that
Mhm.
we would give at Downtown Sound. And so Phil Clendenin became one of the main engineers, and I learned a lot and worked a lot with him and a number of other people. But during that time, I mean, it went from Dick Hyman and Jerry Mulligan's big band used to rehearse in there and record,
Right.
and then there was like the world music of there was like Abdullah Ibrahim, they could call him
Mhm.
Dollar
Yeah.
Brand. There was the avant-garde guys. There were you know I had opportunities like through Audio Fidelity. We did offshoot label called Image, and Astrid Gilberto, who ended up being Hank's girlfriend for
Yeah, yeah.
many years. She recorded that there, and I got to play drums with and there's
Oh,
tracks with, I mean, Chet Baker's on that record, Ron
yeah.
Carter's on that record. So I'm like, yeah, I'm on a record with
Nice. Yeah, yeah.
which, so it was just like incredibly lucky stuff like that. And then what happened was through that, I ended up becoming the manager of the studio.
Mhm.
Hank always had a zillion things going on. I mean, because of his background. I mean, first he's writing and his photography and his background as having been in the CIA
Yeah.
and how that all transitioned. We could go into a whole thing, but he, should do a podcast with him.
Well, yeah.
But like there would be days where literally, I mean, I was sitting there and and Jackie Onassis walks in, like, it
Sure.
was that kind of place, but it was in the middle of, like,
Right,
everything in the outside world. I mean, there could be guys fucking each other
right,
on this
right.
literally on the steps,
Yeah, it's
you
the
know?
fall of Rome outside the
It was
door, you know?
just a bizarre time,
Wow.
and, fortunately for me, I had managed to that was really the point where I had the blessing and the clarity to deal with my demons.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
I was a couple of years out of my heroin stuff and all the
yeah,
stuff. But the sad thing for me was these a bunch of people I idolized and just I mean, names don't matter, but I mean,
yeah.
they were in the throes of that stuff
Right,
then,
right,
and
right.
that was really, it just was heartbreaking to me because
Yeah.
I saw a bunch of people who eh,
No,
they were phenomenal and they would have been even more phenomenal, but they
right.
died.
No,
You
no,
know?
no. I mean, I saw a lot of it in my career, and I mean, it's one of the reasons why I never touched anything. You know what I mean?
No, which is
I
great.
mean, well, it was it's not really even willpower. I just never cared. You
Right.
know what I mean? And
Well, and
and
you
and
had you were driven in so many positive ways in the music, but that you also, you know, you did see that that was not something
right,
that
right.
wasn't gonna benefit you.
And being around it with like a lot of the musicians I played with, by the 3rd set, they're all a half in the bag,
Yeah.
and it's like they're sloppy, and you're like, "Look, we're getting paid to fucking do this." You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Try to keep your shit together for the rest of the gig. And I just got, I mean, when I first met Dave, when I ran up to him at the Copley Plaza, and I said, "Oh, Mr. McKenna, do you give lessons?" And he just looked up at me and he goes, "Why don't you leave me the fuck alone? I'm just trying to make a living."
Yeah.
You know? And
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 I'm sure he was half in the bag
well,
as
he was
well.
more than half at
Yeah,
that point. I mean,
he
those
was
were
in
the
the bag.
oh, yeah, those were my wild Irish nose ears. And on St. Patty's Day, he'd play my wild Irish nose rose with his nose, if he was drunk enough, and it still sounded good.
I'm
Um,
sure.
but then I told him that story years later when he had been off the booze for a long time. I said, "Remember what?" I said, "You don't remember when I first met you, but we had become very close." And I
Yeah.
told him that story, and the look on his face, because Dave was a real sweetheart, and I mean, the look on his face was like, "Oh, Mike, I'm
I'm
so
so sorry.
sorry. I'm so sorry." I said, "Dave, it didn't have any effect on me. I still showed up every goddamn night to watch you play." You know what I mean? He was, but that whole idea of, I mean, it's so easy, especially for a teenager, to get involved in that stuff, and I mean, lucky for, the amazing thing is you pulled yourself out of it. I mean, I've known you, as I say, over 30 years, and you're perfectly fine.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
no, I'm not yeah, that's long. I
yeah,
wouldn't even know where to
yeah, and it's good, but the fact is, yeah, it took a lot of guys we know and a lot of guys we know of, way too soon, and it's one of the things that as I said, I've just stayed away from it my whole life, especially when I found out that, like, there was as many calories in a glass of scotch as there was in chocolate cake. So
yes.
I'm gonna take the cake every time, you know? Um, and I mean, the other thing is, weirdly, to go on a little bit about, me, but,
I'd
when
like
I
to hear
first
more.
met Penn, I didn't know Penn, you know what I mean? I knew he was the loudmouth guy that was on TV with the little guy that didn't say anything, and he did magic tricks, and I knew that he was on Stern a lot, and he was a loudmouth bully on Stern, but funny, and I'd seen him on Letterman maybe once or twice, but I didn't follow magic, and I don't follow, I didn't watch TV. I say this all the time to the point where it's just a joke, but it's true. To me, The Simpsons is still a new show. You know what I mean? I mean, it came on the air right as I started gigging and never saw it, and I didn't have a VCR or anything,
Yep,
so
yep.
I still think of it as that. It's been on a couple of years. But,
Oh, I
it
so get that 'cause,
um,
yeah, I
yeah,
mean, during COVID, I saw stuff that I never saw The Sopranos or
no,
whatever.
no. Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, and
it's
but
been around
but
forever.
so I knew who Penn was when he came in to see me play, and the guy that brought him in, that's a whole 'nother story, but I was shocked at how polite and down to earth he was. I wound up sitting with them, and then I invited them. We were doing, stretches out in Las Vegas, and Hank came out to record the record,
Yep.
and I invited Penn just to be polite, and he showed up with a bunch of people, and then we started hanging, but what
But you were already playing with Penn and Teller then?
No, 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 no.
Oh,
No,
really?
no, I had just come out to Vegas in '99, and we did that record. That's when I first met Penn. I invited him to the recording of that record,
Oh,
and,
wow.
so, John Keel came out with a digital recorder that he rented, and Hank came out, and the fact is, what I was most when I went to lunch with him after that, he said, "I've never had a drink of alcohol or a drug in my life. Teller's the same way." And I was like, "Oh, these are people that I could be friends with." You know what I mean? These are not, I thought they'd be well, I also thought they were just out of my league to be friends with because I figured, Penn had this reputation of, knowing Al Goldstein. He
Oh,
was
yeah.
pals with Al Goldstein, and he had this reputation as, a real big free love guy and a big, and I thought, this is a guy that's probably going to be dropping $1,000 at a strip club. I can't hang with these guys. You know what I mean? And
Well, he did have those rehearsal or those jam
well,
sessions.
he did have the yeah, he did have
I'm
the
just
band. Those were the but both of them are just the most down to earth, easygoing, non-pretentious
yep.
people that I've ever met. I mean, your idea of telling Louis Bellson unloading the drums, Penn won't lift anything, but but that's out of laziness, not out of being a big shot. But I mean, they're just regular guys, and I
Yeah,
said, oh, these are guys that have, that are been on Broadway 3 times and they're big shots and all this stuff, but they're really good guys. Being on the cruises and being around the musicians that I've been around my whole life now, you get to a certain level in music or magic or theater or acting, and you become relaxed with yourself and assured of yourself, and there's none of the pretense and none of the ego, basically.
yep.
I mean, you knew Clark Terry very well.
I was just gonna say
You know,
Clark Terry. Milt Hinton, I
Neil
spent
Hinton, yeah,
so
same.
much time with Milt and Mona Hinton
Yep.
and, yeah,
I mean,
and people like
nothing
no,
there.
I mean, it couldn't be more
Right.
yeah,
No
not
evidence
even down to
that they're
earth, just
giants.
genuinely
You know?
sweet people.
Yeah, 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 and it seems like, I mean, somebody told me this, 30 years ago, and I've always kept an eye out for it. It's always sort of the second tier level of players that have the attitude, and the
Yeah,
ride
yeah,
to the gig wasn't right, and the fucking, and sound isn't good and all that. The real guys just get up and do what they do. You know what
exactly.
I mean? I mean,
Oh, I have so many stories about calling guys that are literally at the top of the food chain, who I just, oddly enough, they were for different gigs, or I was for
Mhm.
a long time I was contracting different things, but I would call a guy who was like on tour in New Zealand, and he would call me. He'd call me back in 10 minutes, and he was
Right.
like, "Yeah, I'll be back Thursday. I could be able to make it." And I'll call some guy who's not doing shit, who thinks he's all that, and he'd
Mhm.
be like, "Oh, well, can you get more money? Can you did it?" And I'm like, it was just so interesting, like how certain guys
Yeah. Well, it's
just
funny. I mean, and this is a different story altogether, but Penn said to me one time, and it's an amazing thing, and it's true. I was trying to get a certain guy, a writer who's now passed away, but a really great writer named Terry Teachout,
oh yeah,
to do liner notes for one of my albums. And Terry was a friend of mine, and he'd seen me play, and he loved my playing, but he was busy, and he was always busy, and it was like 6 or 7 months into, well, do you think you'll get to be able to do it?
I
And
can't remember this. I think
um, well, I don't know. This was past. This was for not for a Chiaroscuro release.
no, but I think you might
Um,
have told me
yeah.
about it. Anyway, go ahead.
Well,
Sorry.
anyways, so I called Neil Gaiman,
Oh yeah.
right? And I said, I didn't call him. I texted him, and I said, hey, could you do a blurb for my new record coming out? I know you're busy. I know you're incredibly busy. And Neil wrote back, I am incredibly busy. I've got this new TV show, which was, one of the 20 TV shows that he had running, and some new movie coming out, and 2 books. When do you need it by? And I said, oh, anytime you can do it. The next day, he sends it. And so my point in saying that is, Penn said to me, "If you want something done, ask someone who's busy because they're busy getting shit done." You know what
Ah,
I mean?
that's a
He
great
said,
line. That's
yeah, I
true
mean, it's true
though.
because the guys that that will not shine you on, but guys that are just, oh, I haven't gotten to it yet. Oh, I haven't. It's because they're not doing anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because they don't get anything done.
Yeah, I mean, when
Oh,
Penn,
that's a really great line. I mean,
yeah,
like, that's so true.
and when Penn did the liner notes for Stretches Out, the record that I met him on out here,
Yep.
I said, "Would you do the liner notes?" That afternoon, he sends me finished liner notes that don't need to be edited. I did them on the plane flying to New York. And I said, yeah, and they were great, and they were funny and insightful, and I mean, it's so, but yeah, but all of the guys that are really good and have made it and have a reputation, everything, they don't have to they
Yeah,
don't have to
boast
be
of it.
assholes.
Yeah, I mean, there
Not
used to be
that
a thing about, like, guys who were really in the war, they don't talk about their war
Right,
stories.
right. I said to my dad, he was in the Navy in World War
Yep.
II in the South Pacific, and I said, "What was it like being in the Navy in World War II in the South Pacific?" And he said, "I didn't like it." And
That's
that's all
another
he ever said about
yeah, yeah, yeah.
in the
I
Navy,
but no, but
Yeah,
it's so interesting, yeah.
yeah,
I mean,
and
people who have
but
to tell you how smart they are or how rich they are or
right.
how
Well, that's
important they
another
are,
line that's
they're
another line that I stole from Penn. Every time someone says, "I'm really smart," I say, "Yeah, Einstein used to say that all the time." "Oh, wait." You
no,
know?
he didn't
I
say
mean, yeah, no, exactly. And it's very funny that, but the guys that, I mean, and almost to a person that I've met through Hank and through you and through Chiaroscuro, they were all that level and caliber of human being in addition to being, genius jazz artists,
Yeah, I was so blessed to be and yeah, I mean, there was a day that I drove out to Rudy Van Gelder's that I had Cab Calloway, Milt Hinton, Eddie Bearfield, and we picked up Dizzy and went to in my mother's station wagon.
Ah!
Now, like, you can't make that up.
No.
Like, we were driving, I went across the Tappan Zee to Englewood, picked up Dizzy, and then we went to Rudy Van Gelder's, and I have the 4 like, these absolute legends,
Yeah.
like, and it was like we were just, I was just, I just had to pinch myself. It
Well,
was just,
sure.
and
Sure.
I spent many hours driving Milt. You know, I mean, I would go out to St. Albans, Queens, and
Mhm.
get his bass, and I mean, not because it was a gig, just because I loved being around him.
Right,
you
right.
know,
Yeah, I mean, one of the highlights of my life was getting to play with him, I
oh
mean, and he
man,
was, I don't know how old he was then, 90,
yeah,
but,
probably 90.
and I mean, I had already, he had his first book of photography out because I'm a nutty pretend
Oh yeah,
photographer,
yep,
but just to those images are so his eye was so hip and, all that backstage, be in studio stuff that he did over the years,
yep.
and I'm like, I'm sitting there playing with him, and it was at one of the jazz cruises that weird travel company from St. Louis, I think it was.
The
They had
jazz
private
club.
Yeah,
The
they had private parties on the
Yeah,
thing,
yeah.
and so
She
I'm
was a
playing.
travel agent, and so she would get a big block of rooms and
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, Hank says, "Hey, you wanna make some extra money on the cruise, play this party?" And I'm like, "Sure." And I go, and it's Milt on bass, and we played for, like, a half an hour, and then, Johnny Mandel sits down and starts singing Emily and The Shadow of Your Smile, and I'm, like, sitting, this next to him, you know
Yeah,
what I
yeah,
mean? There's something so, deep
yeah.
about
It's
sitting
so
next
deep.
to the guy that wrote the fucking thing performing it,
Yeah,
and he couldn't
absolutely.
sing at all, but he had the great wig and you know, and he was so sweet. I mean, that was the weird cruise that, like, Evans and Livingston were on and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, yeah, it was just great, but all those people, you were so, I mean, well, you came of age at the exact right time. I mean, I say that I was born, if I'd have been born in 42, I would have probably had a much better career. But all of the musical confluence that happened in New York in the 60s and 70s was so, I mean, it changed everything. I
Yeah,
mean,
I
it
mean, a lot
wasn't, I
yeah.
mean, it's much more important than like even the bebop revolution, in the 50s and 52nd Street and all that stuff, which is where I would have wanted to be, you know.
No, I mean, it
You know,
I feel very blessed. I have, believe it or not, I probably have 70% of all the ticket stubs from all those things. I
Wow.
still have I have them, and I keep saying I'm going to try to put them like I mean, I don't even know if I could fit them all, but like under a glass on a coffee table kind of thing, because I don't
Right.
want to, but there's something I got to do with them. But
Yeah, that would be cool.
it's
Yeah.
just it's just amazing because there's no line that connected, and then from Hank, I ended up working for John Hammond.
Right.
I did work with George Avakian and some of the really great producers of,
Mhm.
you know, I was just incredibly lucky,
Right.
and I'm just grateful beyond words because I have relationships with people to this day, and so many of them are gone, but of the people, people like
Yeah.
you, I mean, you know, we spent a lot of time over the years
Yeah.
talking just,
Oh, yeah.
about so many different things. I remember when God, how back when your brother passed and when
Yeah.
like
I
things that it was just such a I remember when your folks came down to Brewster when you were I'm trying
Oh,
to
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
They were
but
singing
it's
at
like
Stanley
those
Hall.
kind of
Yeah. No, I
when
know, and I mean, it seems like I mean, again, it's partially our age, but it seems like that stuff didn't happen that long ago. You
oh,
know
I
what I mean?
know. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I remember, obviously I remember the Steinway Hall thing because that was right after my brother passed. But I remember just going into your place and waiting for the train, down the street from your place in Brewster
Yep.
to go to Manhattan. And it's 35 years ago. It's 32 years ago,
So when did you record Oh Look at Me Now?
91 or 93. I don't know, 91, maybe 93. I
Yeah, but early 90s.
Yes, very early.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's definitely
Yeah, 34 years.
35 years or
Yeah,
30 close, 30
yeah.
over
Well,
30.
because Hank, I mean, I hung out with Hank and got lunches and hamburgers with him and took him to the studio, and John we did that for over a year,
Yep,
and I
yep.
finally, like, said to him, you know, "Do you wanna make a record?" And he said, "I make records with people I like, and I've been trying to I that's what I've been doing the last year is getting to know you."
Did he say that?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
And I
that's funny.
Yeah, and
Well,
so
what about I mean, he heard you play.
yeah, I know, but I guess he didn't wanna deal with I guess he was having some trouble with Kenny Deverne at the time.
No, my well,
But
that's
yeah, yeah,
well,
so I think it
just interesting, tomorrow will be Hank's 85th birthday,
Oh, I'll call him.
June 5th. Yeah, give him
Yeah,
a call. I'll call him as well, but
yeah, I'll call him and I'll see if I can get him on the podcast. Um,
I'm gonna call him for his birthday. Is it okay if I tell him he better do your podcast
yes,
before
please do. Please force him into it.
I know, 'cause
I
we just had dinner about a month ago, and,
Right.
he was doing great,
He's
and but
It's great.
I owe so much to him because
Well, me too.
I mean, but he's a guy that just never, very we're all tweaked and crazy out of our minds, but he just was so kind and such a good friend and so mentoring to me always,
Yeah, yeah.
and,
Well, the whole scene, Hank, it's its own
you can't
world, and
explain
it's
it.
so no, you can't, and it's so hip and so fun to be around, and,
It is.
you know, um, I know that it couldn't ever come out, but the one cruise that we did that was the Steve Allen tribute
Yep,
cruise
yep, yep,
with that band, I know you must have recorded those guys. That Terry Gibbs big band with all the Steve Allen alumni I mean, the trumpet section was like John Faddis and
yep.
it was everybody.
Wasn't Arturo on there too?
Yeah, yeah,
Yep, yep,
and
yep.
the sax section was like Phil Woods, Jerry Mulligan, I think, Kenny Deverne I mean, not Kenny, uh, Ken
Probably Flip
Peplowski.
Phillips, right?
Pardon me?
Probably Flip
Flip
Phillips.
Phillips and Ken Peplowski,
Okay, yeah.
and, it was but man, I remember that band as absolutely on fire for those they did like 2 or 3 performances on the ship, and it was so good. It was all the Dream Band charts,
Yep.
and man, I don't know if he ever recorded that or not, but,
You know,
you know
I didn't, and I don't know how else it would have been
Oh,
recorded,
okay. Yeah, but,
but there were so many moments like
I know.
that were just so,
Yeah.
you just can't you could never capture them again.
No, but
They were
that was a
spontaneous.
dream. That really was. And
Yeah,
Terry Gibbs still around,
yeah, 100 years
100
old,
years old. Yep.
getting 100 and a half.
Yeah, is he getting any gigs?
No,
Ah. Um,
I talked to him a few weeks ago.
oh, yeah, that's what you said. You were talking to him for like
You
an
know,
hour?
every Saturday he does a Facebook Live.
No shit.
Yeah, yeah, and it's so crazy. And like, do you know who Bill Crow is? Bass
Sure.
player. Yeah,
Bass
yeah.
player.
So like Bill's like 97 or 8, and he's still doing gigs.
Oh my God.
And yeah, and he'll come on there and he'll be like, "Oh yeah, remember, some crazy one night, in 1952."
Right.
And Terry's, I mean, he's loony as could be, but his recall is
Right,
like I
right.
can't remember anything, and he's 100 years old. And
Wow.
so is Bill Crow. Is
Yeah.
like you're just like, man. But
Yeah.
I think the music has a lot to do with that
Well,
too.
I think it does. And as I've often said, if jazz musicians don't kill themselves with drugs and alcohol, they
Yep.
usually live a long time, and as I say, I'm hoping to make 100 because,
You're gonna make 100. But
but,
like think about like it is like there's something about if you have a gig or you could be seriously hurting or sick or but for some reason having that gig and that moment while you're playing is like
yeah.
it's medicine that you can't get anywhere else. It just
No, it's
like
true.
your endorphins and your I don't know what it
Yeah,
is, but
yeah.
it's definitely true.
It's good for you. Well, I'll tell you, I think that, I hope that Penn and Teller live to be 100 and work till 100.
Yeah, I hope.
Um, but, um, but,
Well, I hope you have your world tours like more well established by then.
yeah, yeah. Well, I plan on, by the time I'm your age
Yeah.
and, I hopefully, be a household name like Drano. Um, well, that's a Phyllis Diller joke. Uh,
Oh, that sounds
but,
like Phyllis Diller.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But you got to add the afterwards. Well, all right. Well, I want to thank you so much for John.
I want to thank you so much for. I mean, I know this
I
poor
think we could
Jen
do another
is
hour.
just going to have to edit away here, but
Yeah, yeah, but I think we could do another hour. And maybe I'll call on you for more detailed
well,
inside musical
there's a
stuff
lot
from
more
the 80s.
interesting people you could call. But
Nah, you're so far
I love to
up
talk
there.
to you.